Return once again, hockey fans, and welcome to another player biography, and have we got one for you today. Going all the way back to an era I've never covered before, the original 6. However, his career would see the league expand from 6 to 21 teams, one of the all-time greats whose accomplishments are only exceeded by his competitive drive and will to win on any given night, plus his leadership and guidance to those around him. I'm talking about the one and only Stan Mikita. Not the biggest player on the ice, but certainly had the biggest heart on any given night. So this two-part series, we take a look at a man ingrained in Chicago culture, stamped his legacy as one of the greatest in NHL history. Let's take a look. Stan Mikita was born Stanislav Głoth in a small village in the Slovak Republic on May 20th, 1940. He was raised by his parents, Joe and Emilia. However, in 1948, they believed their son could have a better life elsewhere, and they sent him to St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, where his aunt and uncle, Anna and Joe Mikita, were residing, having left their homeland some 20 years prior. The couple had no children of their own and decided to raise him as if he was one of their very own, and his name was legally changed to the surname of Mikita, and going by Stan, a short version of his birth name. As much as he missed his parents, he stated later on that he didn't realize until his adult years what true communism really was until he escaped it. And apparently German soldiers littered throughout his country even after World War II, and it was a type of environment that his parents didn't want him to grow up in. Stan, of course, as he grew up, understood Canadian culture and pastimes, and of course, professional hockey was one of them. He always remained proud of his Slovak heritage despite growing up in St. Catharines. But even at a young age, he wasn't even the biggest of hockey players and was a very scrappy young man who felt that it was his way to survive in a game against bigger opponents. And his style of grittiness and fearlessness caught the eye of the St. Catharines Teebies of the Ontario Hockey Association, the precursor to the OHL, and the team was sponsored by the Chicago Blackhawks of the National Hockey League. Back then there was no entry draft, and the NHL used junior teams, which they were in charge of, to breed future stars of tomorrow. Mikita joined the club at the age of 16 for the 1956-57 season, where he joined a rising star in junior hockey by the name of Bobby Hull, who was on the cusp of joining the NHL. Mikita had 47 points in 52 games in his first season with the Teebies, not bad at all. He emerged as the team's biggest star, however, in 1957-58 with his big plays and racking up big numbers, had a great release in his shot. It showed with 78 points in 52 games and 146 penalty minutes to go with it. Mikita was catching the eye of scouts and management in the Chicago organization. His no-nonsense style and playmaking abilities, he was on fire during the 1958-59 season with the Teebies. However, Mikita got a very important call in late November of 1958. Chicago Blackhawks, dealing with injuries, called Mikita up as they needed a skater for a game against the three-time defending Stanley Cup champion Montreal Canadiens. So indeed, on November 27, 1958 at Chicago Stadium, Stan Mikita suited up for his first NHL game in Chicago for a Blackhawks team that was still trying to find its footing, coached by Tommy Ivan, who was behind the bench for much of the Red Wings' success in the 1950s. Despite being a 6-team league, the Chicago Blackhawks haven't won the Stanley Cup in nearly 20 years, or appeared in it in over 14. Now, they haven't made the playoffs since 1953, and for his first face-off, Mikita went toe-to-toe in the face-off circle with superstar Jean Béliveau. Mikita at 5'9" recalled the experience of feeling like he was staring at Béliveau's stomach, being that Béliveau is a half a foot taller. The Hawks lost the game 2-1. Mikita didn't play, however, when the Hawks went up against the Leafs 2 days later, but on November 30th he did suit up against the Rangers at home, and in the third period, with the Hawks trailing 2-1 with 7:13 to play, Mikita set up the legendary terrible Ted Lindsay for the game-tying goal for his first career NHL point. Mikita went back to St. Catharines to continue to excel at this junior club, but got another call and played one more NHL game that year on December 21st, and garnered his first 2 penalty minutes on a boarding call. The Hawks beat the Red Wings 4-2 that night. Mikita would finish his year with the Teebies, where he scored 97 points in 45 games with nearly 200 penalty minutes. And indeed, in the 3 games he played, he garnered an assist, and it was to the great Ted Lindsay. Can't get off to a much better start than that. Mikita's big year with the Teebies and his appearance in 3 NHL games certainly set him on a path to something huge. People may not have known at the time, but the legacy of Stan Mikita was truly in its genesis this year, and the Blackhawks organization would never be the same, which is good, because it was in desperate need of a change. Indeed, Stan Mikita was going into the 1959-60 season as a member of the Chicago Blackhawks, having made their roster. The new head coach was Rudy Pilas, as Tommy Ivan was focused on general manager duties. The Hawks last season made the playoffs for the first time since 1953, and Mikita was joining a rising star in the league, the man with the blazing slap shot, his former Teepees teammate Bobby Hull. They had a reliable team captain in Ed Litzenberger, as well as the great terrible Ted Lindsay, who of course was best known for his days in Detroit nearing the downswing of his career. He had hard-working forwards such as Ted Sloan, Eric Nestorenko, Ron Murphy, and a really good setup man in Bill Hay. On defense, he had Dollard St. Laurent, who brings Stanley Cup experience to the club, winning 4 with the Habs. He had fan favorite Big Moose Vasco and reliable Al Arbour, and one of the hardest-working defensemen in the game, Pierre Pilote. And in net, one of the all-time greats, Glenn Hall. On paper, as talented as this team looked going into the 1959-60 season, they didn't exactly have champion written all over them. But let's see what our hero can do and try to make a difference to this team, which has gone from being terrible to just middle of the road. So Mikita in his first official rookie season helps the Blackhawks open up the season against a team that, like them, had a long Stanley Cup slump dating back to 1940. The New York Rangers. In the game, Mikita assisted on a goal by Bobby Hull. The Hawks led 3-1 going into the third period when Hull returned the favor, setting up Mikita, who passed the great Gump Worsley, and he had his first career NHL goal. The Hawks were going to win 5-2, and in addition to that, a goal and assist, he was a +3 on the evening. Mikita had a repeat performance in a 6-3 win over the Leafs, a goal and an assist, and this time was a +2. However, this began a 14-game winless streak for the Hawks, in which Mikita played 13 of them, and he didn't rack up huge numbers, but remained a +2, and another skill he had coming to the surface, that of a great face-off man, however, was coming into play. People were thinking, however, same old Hawks. Well, that wasn't the case, as they did slowly start to pick things up again. Our hero had a 2-goal game, his first of his career in a 6-2 win over the New York Rangers. He was becoming a huge fan favorite in Chicago, almost a working-class type hero, and his aggression and gritty play was also winning him fans. On December 12th in Toronto, he received a total of 20 minutes and penalties, including a 10-minute misconduct, after a brutal fight with Ted Hampson of the Leafs. But Stan had some more big performances ready with his stick and his fist for that matter. He garnered 3 assists in a 7-4 win over the Leafs on December 20th. In a brutal 9-2 loss to the powerful Habs, Mikita had the rare coveted Gordie Howe hat-trick, a goal, scored on Jacques Plante no less, an assist and a fight, where he held his own against Montreal tough guy Bill Hickey. Some critics were calling Mikita an undisciplined hothead, but it seemed as the rest of the team was responding to him. A couple weeks later, on January 10th, he got into a violent scrap with Henry Richard, who, like Mikita, wasn't a very big man, but always stood up for himself, much like his older brother, Maurice. Well, Mikita and Richard had a dandy, and both men were assessed misconducts. On a February 4th game against the Bruins, he had another 3-assist night and a huge 7-2 win for the Blackhawks, as they were in the playoff hunt. It was a neck-and-neck battle with Boston, but on March 15, 1960, in a huge 3-2 win over the Red Wings, the Chicago Blackhawks were headed to the playoffs, meaning Stan Mikita, in his first year, gets a taste of playoff hockey. Now, of course, in a 16-team league, the playoffs are not overly long. Only the top 4 make it, and the Hawks actually managed to finish third, meaning they had to face the first-place overall team, meaning... yes, the 4-time defending Stanley Cup champion Montreal Canadiens were in their way and had beaten them last season in the playoffs, despite a fight from the underdog Hawks. And the gang was all there, coached by the great Toe Blake. You had gentleman Jean Beliveau, you had the Rocket, the Pocket Rocket, Boom Boom, and Dickie Moore. And that's just their forward core. Defense, a power play anchored by the great Doug Harvey and tough Tom Johnson, and in net, the man who donned the goalie mask that very year, Jacques Plante. So, counting their coach, that's 9 Hall of Famers. Not to mention other greats of their time. Ralph Backstrom, Claude Provost, Jean-Claude Tremblay, Jean-Guy Talbot. The Hawks knew that this was going to be a tall order, but the fact is, if they can pull off the upset, they can just go to the Stanley Cup Finals like that. Our hero actually misses Game 1 with a minor injury, but the Hawks are competitive and are keeping up with the Habs, which in this era wasn't easy, let alone beating them. But the Hawks would fall short 4-3 at the Montreal Forum. Game 2, Stan is in action, and he is a warrior out there. The foreign crowd and atmosphere does not strike intimidation into him whatsoever. And after a goal from Moore in the first for the Habs, Stan sets up Kenny Warham, who would become a big part of his career. It's a goal. Just over a minute and a half later, the game is tied 1-1 after 1. And the Habs led 3-2 as the clock was winding down, but Bill Hay tied it with nearly a minute left. We're off to overtime, but halfway through the frame, as Jacques Plante is a wall, Doug Harvey scored the winner. The Hawks are down 2-0 as we ship to the Windy City. And it's a disaster. Plante does not let in another goal in the rest of the series. The Hawks are shut out 4-0 in Game 3, 2-0 in Game 4. Mikita also had no shots on goal in both games. The Hawks are swept out, and the Habs will go on to win their 5th straight Stanley Cup, beating the Toronto Maple Leafs. Mikita was working hard as anyone on the ice, but this Habs team was just plain unstoppable at this point, and this Hawks team just wasn't ready for that task. Hell, nobody was. In his rookie year, Stan Mikita had 8 goals, 18 assists for 26 points in 67 games. The schedule was only 70 games back then, keep in mind. Half his goals were assisted by Bobby Hull, who had a breakout year himself. A third of Stan's assists were to Kenny Warham, which was nearly half of Warham's goals that year. He had 14. And he had worked well with defenseman Pierre Pilote, setting up 5 goals together. He had amazing chemistry too with Ted Lindsay. However, Ted retired that year. Mikita came in 4th for Calder Trophy voting as the league's Rookie of the Year. He has actually lost to teammate Bill Hay, and he finished 3 votes ahead of teammate Murray Balfour. Stan had 25 votes, and the fact that 3 of the 5 who got votes for Blackhawks players showed their future looked bright. Also, considering Bobby Hull himself was only 21, Chicago was becoming a team not to sleep on. Mikita's rookie season, he was 5th among rookies in scoring, 4th in the entire league in penalty minutes with 119, 4th in Calder Trophy voting for Rookie of the Year. It was also a plus 13, but most importantly, was instrumental in Chicago's playoff appearance. He was leading by example out there with the heart of a tiger, lion, and warrior all in one. Despite criticisms of his penalty acclamation, he didn't let it deter him. But again, with all this young talent and now the right forces guiding him, the Chicago team is one to look out for. Mikita had made an immediate impact on his team and is getting noticed around the league. His teammates admire his spirit and his hustle. He played every single game like a championship was on the line. And with this young Blackhawks club going into the 1960-61 season, the general consensus was they were a team not to sleep on, but also not quite ready to be champions yet. As I mentioned earlier, they haven't been champions since 1938. The city of Chicago was suffering for a major sports championship. The most recent one was NFL's Chicago Bears, who won the league title in 1946. Baseball's Cubs and White Sox hadn't taken home a World Series title since the early part of the 20th century. Despite all this, Chicago sports fans are loyal and loud, and boy do they love their Blackhawks. They always had a devoted following. They loved their working-class player in any sport. Stan Mikita was definitely one of them. The Hawks actually got out to a hot start, only losing one of their first 9 games. One of them was a huge win on October 22nd in Montreal against the 5-time champion Habs. 3 days later at home, another win over Montreal. Mikita had a goal and an assist, but the Hawks then went into a slump. All the while, Mikita was not afraid to use his stick to gain the advantage in a given shift, and not exactly the most ethical way either. In a 4-0 win over the Rangers, Mikita had a goal and an assist. Just when the Hawks looked like they were going to have another middle-of-the-road season, they actually went on an 8-game unbeaten streak that started on Christmas Day, a streak that includes 7 straight wins, I might add, and our hero went on an absolute tear. 10 goals, 5 assists for 15 points, and a plus 10, and get this, just 2 penalty minutes. Experts were pointing out this is the most disciplined and strict game of hockey Mikita has played so far in his young career. This also included back-to-back 3-point nights against Boston and Detroit. He was a beast out there. Mikita continued to roll. The Blackhawks were back and forth as late January hit. On a January 22nd game against the Rangers, Mikita had a goal and 2 assists for 3 points. And the very next day hosting the lowly Bruins, he garnered 4 assists and was a plus 4. As the season progressed, Mikita was determined to help the Hawks garner a winning record for the first time since 1945-46, and getting into the playoffs was much easier this year than last. However, Mikita rolled with big games, another goal and an assist in a win over Detroit, another big 3-point night with a goal and 2 assists, and a big win over the Rangers on March 8th, and then on March 11th, a moment where he received heavy criticism. Mikita got into a heated confrontation with an NHL referee that looked like he might have gotten a little too physical, and some say he did lay his hands on the referee and was too aggressive and was assessed an abuse of officials penalty. A bench brawl erupted late in the game, which ended in a 2-2 tie, and Mikita went toe-to-toe with 6'2" Bert Olmsted. He had a total of 15 penalty minutes in the game. And while his confrontation with the officials was deemed reckless and unhinged, his fearlessness in the fight, however, was praised by some. The Chicago Blackhawks finished 29-24-17 for 75 points. That's their best of the 6 teams, their first winning record in many years. So now, it's playoff time. And oh dear, for the second straight year, they faced the Montreal Canadiens, now 5-time defending Stanley Cup champion. There was one big change, however, in Montreal, as the legendary Rocket Maurice Richard retired after 18 seasons in 1960. However, the team still finished with the exact same total of points they had the year prior, 92, best in the league. Most experts and pundits agree that Montreal dynasty would continue, but the Chicago team was a year older, a year wiser, and our hero was one of the reasons for this team's success. But was it even going to be close to enough? Well, here we go. Game 1 of the Montreal Forum. The Hawks are completely decimated 6-2. Our hero is very ineffective, and it looks like the series is over before it even starts. In Game 2, however, the Hawks were a much more focused and disciplined bunch. After a scoreless first period, in the second period, our hero opened the scoring on a power play set up by Kenny Warham. And the Hawks had a 2-0 lead, but they let it slip. And the Habs tied it before the end of the period. The game was tied 3-3 as the clock wound down, but Ed Litzenberger scores with 2:55 to play. To the shock of many, the Blackhawks hand the Habs their first playoff defeat at home since April 10th, 1958, and the series is tied heading back to Chicago, or should I say just heading to Chicago. And for Game 3, our hero is in no-nonsense mode. The goaltending showdown between Glenn Hall and Jacques Blond, however, is one for the ages. Mikita got into a huge scrap with Bill Hickey, who was a very well-mannered player most of his career. The Hawks looked to have Game 3 and the series lead in hand, but Henry Richard scored with 36 seconds to play. The future Hall of Fame goalies put on a clinic, and as one overtime turned into two, and then into the third, after a tripping call on Dickie Moore on the power play, Stan starts the rush, getting the puck to P-load, and Murray Balfour scores, and the Blackhawks take a 2-1 series lead in one of the most storied games in Blackhawk history. In Game 4, the Hawks do the unthinkable and take total command of the series. Mikita nearly got into a sparring match with Ralph Backstrom, but it didn't quite happen, as the Habs were woken up, however, and took a 3-1 lead, but Mikita near the midway point of the second made it 3-2. The Habs tied the series with a 5-2 win. Game 5, back at the Forum. Many were calling the Hawks' success in the series a fluke, but Glenn Hall was sensational as he and Plum put on another show. After a scoreless first period, Moose Vasco scored to make it 1-0, and that's how it would stay after 2 periods. Late in the third, however, former Hab Ab McDonald scored, and then just over 2 minutes later, Ab sets up Stan, who gets the game-clinching goal in a 3-0 win. For the first time since the 1955 Stanley Cup Finals, the last time the Habs lost the series even, they were on the verge of elimination. Game 6 is in Chicago. The fans are psyched for what could be one of the biggest playoff upsets in history. And after a scoreless first in the second, Hay, Hall, Nesterenko each score. In the third period, the Hawks defense was on point. The clock wound down 3, 2, 1, 0. Stan Mikita. The Chicago Blackhawks are headed to the Stanley Cup Finals. They have dethroned one of the greatest dynasties in the history of professional sports. They shocked the hockey world, and now in just his second year, and for the Hawks the first time in over 15 years, they are headed to the Stanley Cup Finals. In this series, Mikita showed he had the heart of a champion. Now he has the chance to be one. And awaiting them, another team nobody expected to be in the finals, the Detroit Red Wings, who had upset a very talented Maple Leafs team in 5 games. The Wings are making their first finals appearance in 5 years, last winning 6 years prior in 1955. They were coached by former Wings All-Star player Sid Abel, and in net they were backstopped by the one and only Terry Sawchuk, who that year split duties with Hank Bassin. On the blue line, they were led by Marcel Pronovo, and up front, you had Norm Ullman, Alex Delvecchio, and of course, Mr. Hockey, Gordie Howe, who's about to play in his 7th Cup Final. So here we go. Game 1, Chicago Stadium. In the midway point of the first period, the Hawks started to fly. On the power play, Balfour to Stan to the Golden Jet. It's a goal. 31 seconds later, Mikita begins a rush that leads to Ab McDonald setting up Kenny Warham. Our hero has 2 assists and a 2-0 lead. And just over 3 minutes later, Hull scores again. It's 3-0 Hawks, and that's how it would stay after 1 period. The Wings would eventually fight back and get 2 goals, but it wasn't enough. The Hawks take Game 1, 3-2, a huge game from Mikita. Game 2, we switch to the Detroit Olympia, and yes, formats would change quite often sometimes in the playoffs, but bear with us. But anyway, this night belonged to the Red Wings, and our hero was shut down completely. He didn't have a single shot on goal, and was a -1 in the Wings' 3-1 victory. We're now going back to Chicago for Game 3. And in Game 3, Baston and Hall put on a goaltending clinic in the first period, but in the second period, Mikita wires a shot, it's in the net. The Hawks, much like Game 1, take flight after that. Nearly 2:30 later, Ron Murphy scores. Nearly 4 minutes after that, it's Balfour, 3-0 Hawks after 2, en route to a 3-1 win and a 2-1 series lead. Game 4 at the Olympia, and Sawchuk is in net for the Wings. He's showing flashes of his brilliance from 1952, and the Wings hang on to win it 2-1, and the series is tied 2-2. Well, Game 5, we are back at Chicago Stadium, and it's a wild one. In the first period, the Wings struck first, but then Chicago took a 2-1 lead, and then it was tied 2-2 after 1. The game was tied 3-3 after 2 periods. Cue our hero. On the power play, the defense took command, and Pilo found Mikita in the right spot. He parks it home. The Hawks lead 4-3. Just over 4 minutes later, it's a Mikita to a Warham to Pilo, and it's a goal. 5-3 Hawks. And then with 6:33 to go, Mikita, his second goal of the period. In on all 3 goals that time to give the Hawks a 6-3 win, just 1 game away from being champion. And now here we go at the Olympia for Game 6, but it's been a strictly homer series so far, and many were expecting a 7th game. The Wings did strike, however, with the only goal of the first period, and in the second, Reggie Fleming's shorthanded marker tied it. But with 1:11 to go in the second period, it's Stan to Bobby to McDonald. It's a goal. The Hawks lead 2-1 after 2. The Wings' defense and Basson then fall apart in the third. 57 seconds in, it's Nestorenko. 5:30 later, Evans. With 2 minutes to play, Kenny. 5-1. Hawks, the clock counts down. 3, 2, 1, 0. Our hero assisted on what would be the game winner, the series winner. The Chicago Blackhawks are Stanley Cup champions. Stan Mikita, in just his second season, will have his name immortalized and engraved on the biggest prize in the game. 7 points in 6 games, tied with teammate Bobby Hull for second best in the series. And his memorable performance in Game 5 was pivotal, and assisting on the series-winning goal, and now Mikita is a champion. Success was coming fast for Stan Mikita. Mikita's 11 points was good enough for 4th in the entire playoffs, but his tireless hard work and production in the finals was what stood out more than anything. Mikita had 19 goals, 34 assists for 53 points in his very good sophomore season, and his chemistry with Kenny Warham was off the charts. Warham assisted on nearly half of Mikita's goals, and the 2 combined for 12 assists, and a total of the 2 combined in one way or another for 29 goals. That's more than half of Mikita's point total, and that means all but 16 points of what Warham got that year involved Mikita. And he assisted on a huge 14 goals for Ad McDonald, meaning all but 2 of McDonald's goals that year were set up by our hero. Mikita was actually 5th in the NHL in plus-minus during the regular season with a plus 27. Just goes to show the effect he's having almost any time he's on the ice. When he's not doing time in the penalty box, that is. As you can see, all but the top spot in the top 5 is occupied by Chicago players. And Ad McDonald also reached the top 10 as well. This team was very cohesive. So there you have it. 2 years in, he's a champion. And a major part of that championship, especially in the finals, was his performance in Game 5, again, standing out. Mikita was already a household name among fans in Chicago, but I don't think anyone had any idea just how much more of a star he would be. But in the city, we already knew that. But throughout the world of professional hockey, despite early success, he was just getting started. Chicago's shocking run to win the Stanley Cup turned many heads, of course, and within a year, the team went from being expected to be simply just a team that makes the playoffs, were touted to being the next possible dynasty in the NHL. Mikita's game had developed. His precision and accuracy were something to behold when scoring a goal. His ability to set up a given goal was something people marveled at, not to mention his defensive abilities, especially in the face-off circle. With players like he and Bobby Hull in their prime, it was no wonder this team was being touted as the next big thing in professional hockey. Also, just before the season was about to start, Mikita played in his first NHL All-Star game back in this area, you see. The game was played at the beginning of the season, and it would be the defending Cup champions against the NHL All-Stars. The Hawks, however, would lose the game 3-1. But either way, high hopes were present in Chicago, and our hero was continuing to mature. After starting the season with 2 ties, they beat the Bruins on October 17, and that would be their only win they'd pick up all month. The Hawks, however, got out to a massively disappointing 1-4-5 start. Mikita played some big games, however, with 2 goals against Montreal on October 22nd and 2 assists in a tie against Boston on October 29th. Things improved for the Hawks in November, winning 5 games. As for Mikita, his grittiness and aggression, despite still garnering criticism, is something his teammates respond to in a given game. He shows true leadership by example. And on the score sheet, he responded as well with 12 points in 10 games and a +3, including 2 goals and an assist in a win over Boston to end the month of November. In December, Mikita continued to excel as he was playing on a whole new level. He had back-to-back 3-point games on December 17th, 3 assists against the Rangers, and in Montreal, a goal and 2 assists. Both games were big wins for the Hawks, but then again, we're starting to struggle again. Also, the next game after that, he had 2 assists in a losing cause against the Rangers and ended the month with 2 assists against Montreal. In January, Mikita was playing on an all-star level, 15 points in 14 games and was a +3 on New Year's Day. Picked up right where he left off with a goal and an assist against Montreal, and the same type of game against Toronto. But then Mikita's pugnacious antics continued. An elbow here, high stick there, misconduct there, were all part of a 17 penalty minute game against the Rangers. And then a big 2 assists in a loss against Boston, but ended the month with a goal and 2 assists for 3 points in a win over the Red Wings. It was around this time that during a practice, Mikita suffered a break in his stick and decided not to switch him. This would change NHL history as he realized he could rip off a better shot, faster and more accurate, as his release was already top-notch, now just improved it. An enhancement in an already great strategy. Now, I should say that Andy Bathgate, a future Hall of Famer with the Rangers, and a couple others had experimented with the curved stick, but Mikita was the one I think that truly perfected it, and many agree, as was definitely the innovator of the idea. Mikita's star season continued as the Hawks' fortunes also continued to take a turn for the better. In February, he had 18 points in 13 games and a +6. 2 goals against Boston on February 3rd, a goal and assist against Montreal on February the 11th. 2 goals and 3 assists against Boston on February 18th. And then had 6 points in 2 games against the Red Wings. Back-to-back big game performances make that 8 points in 3 games. Total with a win over Boston and 9 points in 4 just after that in a game against the Leafs. Mikita was on a tear. He ended the season with 9 points in 9 games in March. A monster season for a man affectionately known as Stan the Man. The Hawks finished 31, 26, and 13. Good enough for 3rd place, and a total of 75 points. One of their best seasons in franchise history, although some still considered it somewhat of a disappointment. But who do we got yet again in the semifinals? Yes, it's the Montreal Canadiens for the 4th straight year. And they had one of the best seasons in NHL history with 98 points. Many believe that last year was a fluke. It doesn't matter, they were the champions. But the Habs were poised to take the top of the mountain yet again. So here we go. Game 1 in Montreal. Much like last year, the goaltending showdown between greats Glenn Hall of the Hawks and Jacques Plante of the Habs take center stage. They are turning back everything and putting on a clinic as there is no score after 2 periods. The Habs get 2 goals just over 4 minutes apart early in the 3rd period, but with just under 2 minutes to go, shorthanded, the big stars shined as Pilot and Hall set up Stan, who finally saw Plante. There is still time to tie up, but the Hawks can't get the opportunity. They lose Game 1. In Game 2, the Hawks are looking sharp. Just over 5 minutes in on the power play, Mikita finds Bobby. The Hawks strike first. The Habs tied it up, and it was 1-1 after 1. The only goal of the 2nd period came from our hero, fooling Jacques Plante. It's a goal, 2-1 after 2. The Hawks made it 3-1 during the 3rd after a goal from Hall, and the Hawks looked to have this one well in hand. But the Hawks' defense and Hall just completely fell apart. Later in the 3rd, 3 goals, 3 minutes apart from the Habs. Blackhawks lose 4-3, down 2 games, headed home. Our hero was playing some great hockey, but the Hawks' dreams of a dynasty seem to be fading. Game 3, Chicago desperately needed this one. Chicago Stadium is ready. The defense and Hall, however, tighten up, and the Hawks play a nearly flawless game. Mikita scores late in the 1st period, and they lead 2-0. After leading 3-0 after 2, Stan to Ab to Kenny. It's a goal, 4-0, and the Hawks win this one 4-1. Game 4, Chicago has momentum on their side, and our hero responds huge. In the 1st period, that devastating trio strikes on the power play just less than 2 minutes in. Stan to Pierre to Bobby! It's a goal! And then near the midway point, Mikita sets up Bronco Horvath for a goal. The Chicago Blackhawks lead 2-0 after the 1st period. But in the 2nd half, superstars Beliveau and Moore tied it. It's 2-2 after 2. And then just like that, our hero steers the ship, starts a rush that ends up with him and Warham setting up Ab McDonald. And then on the power play, 37 seconds later, Stan to Kenny to Bill Hay, that is. It's a goal. 4-2, they lead. Mikita has 4 assists on the day, playing one of the biggest games of his life in a 5-3 win, and the series is tied. Game 5, we are back to Montreal and get off to a good start. Less than 3 minutes in, Stan to Bobby! The Hawks draw first blood, and the Habs do take a 2-1 lead, however, but it's 2-2 after the 1st period. But Mikita late in the 2nd helps McDonald set up Kenny Warham. It's a 3-2 lead and a win. 4-3. They're just one game away yet again from upsetting the Habs. And then they indeed shocked the Habs on their home ice. But now here we go for Game 6. Chicago Stadium. Oh boy, they are rocking. Glenn Hall is a wall, stopping 41 shots every single shot he faced. Stan beautifully sets up at McDonald and Warren with the only goals of the game. A huge 2-0 win the series in 6. Oh, for the second straight year, the Hawks are headed back to the finals. Mikita set an NHL record with points in the series. 13 in 6 games, averaging more than 2 points a game, 3 goals, 10 assists, 13 points, a huge series leading +8. His performance in games 5 and 6 were just unbelievably remarkable. The level Mikita was playing at was making many take notice of just how good he truly was. So here we go, the 1962 Stanley Cup Finals, and in their way the Toronto Maple Leafs, who had 10 more points than the Hawks, finishing second place in the entire NHL. The Leafs haven't won a cup since 1951, and I think the Tragically Hip might have written a song about it, but this is their third Finals appearance in 4 seasons. Coached by the aggressive Punch Jim Lack, they were deep at all ends of the ice. Up front, team captain George Armstrong steering the ship greatly. The ever-dynamic Dave Keon, only in his sophomore season. The talented Dick Duff, the multi-purpose Bob Pulford, also Bert Olmsted, Eddie Shack, Bob Nevin, and former Hawks captain Ed Litzenberger. And topping it off, you had superstar forward and one of the best in the game, the Big M, Frank Mahovlich. On defense, just as good if not better. Future Hall of Famers Red Kelly and Tim Horton, yes, that Tim Horton, Alan Stanley, Carl Brewer, and another former Blackhawk, Al Arbor. And in net, the man known as the China Wall, Johnny Bauer. The Leafs hadn't won the cup since 1951, as I mentioned, but again, they are hungry. So here we go. The big prize on the line. The Blackhawks can start their dynasty right here. Game 1 at Maple Leaf Gardens. Things look great early as just 3:35 in on the power play. Stand to be air to Bobby Hull. 1-0 Hawks. But that's as good as it would get. George Armstrong played the game of his life with 3 points en route to a 4-1 win for Toronto. Game 2, the Leafs take a 1-0 lead after 1, and Johnny Bauer was turning everything back, and it was still 1-0 after 2. And then into the third, Bauer is still turning everything back and more, and it wasn't looking good. But then Kenny to Ab to Stan! The game is at last tied, but literally a minute later, Mahovlich scored to help the Leafs retake the lead. And with under 4 minutes to go, the Leafs made it 3-1. But then with 1:33 to go, Bobby DeVere to Stan Mikita. 2 goals for our hero, but it didn't matter. The Leafs win 3-2. Take a 2-0 series lead headed to Chicago, but hey, we saw what happened against Montreal. Game 3, Chicago Stadium has faith. Bauer is again unbelievable. While the Hawks defense is giving Hall a lot of breathing room, but he's making big stops when he has to. But then 4:35 into the second, Ab to Pierre to Stan. The Hawks strike first and continue to steer in the right direction and take Game 3. 3-0, and the Hawks are in the series. Game 4, Chicago takes control as Stan sets up his boy Bobby to open things up, and it's even more bad news for Toronto. They lose Johnny Bauer for the game and the rest of the series, and they have to rely on backup goaltender Don Simmons, a very talented netminder who does have Stanley Cup final experience, but this moment looked to be it for the Leafs. Simmons let in a goal less than a minute into him getting into the game. It was 2-1, however, as the Leafs got one back after 1. But in the second, Stan begins a play that leads to Hayes setting up Hall. It's another huge game for our hero. The Blackhawks win 4-1. It looks like it's pretty much in the bag with Bauer out of action. Also, a heated conversation between Mikita and Mahovlich where Stan tried to show the Leafs star just who's boss is a major highlight. Game 5, however, is in Toronto, and the Leafs just bombard Hall. And let me tell you, he lets in the first goal 17 seconds in, and the Leafs lead 2-0 thanks to 2 goals from Pulford. And then 20 seconds after that, the second goal, Balfour scores, and the Blackhawks only trail by 1 after 1. But then less than a minute into the second period, let's see, Bobby, check, Stan, check, and Ab, check with the goal. The game is tied. But then just over 2 minutes later, Stan, a check, a Bobby, check. It's Ab McDonald again with a second goal. It's 3-2 Chicago. But then the Leafs would score 3 goals just 5 minutes apart and lead 5-3 after 2. The Hawks at Hall just completely get obliterated and lose 8-4. This was a shocking disappointment. Then the Hawks go back home on the verge of elimination. Well, Game 6 in Chicago Stadium, nobody's really losing hope, as the Hawks know that what they can do. They need to bombard Simmons, as he still let in 4 goals in the last game. Hall can bounce back, we all know he can, and he's one of the best in the game. But the Leafs defensive checking core is playing great. They can't get to Simmons that often, and when they do, he's making some really good saves. After 2 periods, it's still tied at 0. And our hero, well, he's being contained heavily by the likes of Bob Pulford. And finally, nearly 9 minutes into the third, Bobby Hull finally strikes. The Hawks sent Chicago Stadium into a frenzy, but not barely a minute and a half later, the Leafs tie it. And with 5:46 to play on the power play, Dick Duff scores. The Hawks trail 2-1. They fight with everything they have, but the clock ticks down. The Leafs win the Stanley Cup, and the series 4-2. Mikita played another fantastic series. It was almost unstoppable yet again, but all the Leafs needed to do was stop him in Game 6, and that was more than enough. Sadly, if the Hawks were going to have a dynasty, it'd have to wait. Stan, however, has a lot to be proud of. His 6 goals and 15 assists, total 21 points, set an NHL record at the time for points in a playoff. A huge accomplishment that no doubt continued to make that emphatic statement that he was one of the best in the NHL, even as some still were failing to realize it. The record was previously 20, held by Gordie Howe in 1955. Also, Mikita's +9 was tied with Leafs defenseman Carl Brewer for best in the playoffs. It was a career year for our hero, 25 goals, 52 assists, for 77 points in 70 games. Once again, it was Kenny Wharram and Ad McDonald who were his best line mates. Wharram assisted on more than a third of Mikita's goals, and together they collaborated one way or another for a total of 28. For the second straight year, Mikita assisted on 14 of Ad McDonald's goals out of the 22 that he scored that year. Combined, they collaborated for 24 goals total. And the crazy thing is that Mikita assisted on all but 1 of Kenny Wharram's goals that year. Stan also assisted on 1/5 of Bobby Hull's 50 goals that year, as Hull was only the 3rd player in NHL history at that point to reach the mark, tying an NHL record. For assist collaboration, Stan combined with 12 different players, but Moose Vasco had the most with 8. Stan's 77 points was tied for 3rd best in the NHL, among with Mr. Hockey, Gordie Howe. No doubt a sensational year for our hero. Now in his 3rd full season, has accomplished more feats of talent, and now the NHL as a whole acknowledged he was one of the best in the league. Well, at least most of them did. So much so, however, that he was named first-team All-Star for the very first time. Oh, what a year for our hero. He is becoming a superstar, tied for 3rd in the league in scoring, also tied for 3rd in power play goals with teammates Bobby Hull and Ad McDonald, also tied in 3rd penalty minutes with Eric Nestorenko and Pierre Pilot with 97. He was tied for 7th in game-winning goals. In addition to playing in his first NHL All-Star game, he played in his 2nd straight Stanley Cup final. He set an NHL record for 21 points in a postseason, and he finished the season with a +12, and to top it off, first-team All-Star honors. Stan's stars skyrocketed. The gradual progression of Stan Mikita going into the 1962-63 season had many in the NHL paying attention. He was already heavily revered in the Chicago area, but he was now considered to be among one of the best. And now with his curved stick, he was ready to embark on a path to try to get this team back to the top of the mountain. Mikita was initially slated to play in the NHL All-Star game, being a first-team All-Star, but was unable to make it. But Stan, like others, were ready for the season to get underway, as Chicago was still an odds-on favorite to be a likely championship contender. But things did not start well for our hero at all. On October 10, 1962, the Hawks hosted Toronto for a Stanley Cup rematch to start the season. And not only did the Hawks lose the game at salt in their wound 3-1, but Mikita was injured early on and would miss 5 games, in which the Hawks only won 1. He returned, however, on October 23rd, scoring a goal against Montreal, and in the next game, this time in Montreal, he scored the game winner. And then in a home-and-home series with the Rangers, he had 3 points each night, 3 assists, and then a goal and 2 assists in the other. Both games were big wins. Since his return, the Hawks, however, hadn't lost, and he had 9 points in 5 games. In November, the Hawks went back and forth, but Mikita had 12 points in 12 games and was a +4. In December, he was still very heavily productive with 12 points in 14 games and was a +7. Mikita's defensive play was also something that often gets overlooked, as again, his prowess in the faceoff circle was something to behold, as he would go toe-to-toe with the league's best in the faceoff circle, Dave Keon, and other star centers such as Jean Bediveau and Norm Ullman, and get the best of them when the puck drops. And he began the new year right, with 2 assists in a win over Detroit, and 2 games later had 2 assists against the Leafs and was a +3, both games wins. 2 assists over Montreal on the 13th, and then scored 2 goals in a win over the New York Rangers on January 20th, and then followed that up with a huge 2 assists in the next game against the Rangers in another win. But then came a huge game from Mikita, a natural hat trick, the first hat trick of any kind of his career in a 9-2 thrashing of the lowly Bruins, as Mikita and Hull, who also had a hat trick that night, lit up poor Eddie Johnston, and the Hawks were aiming to win the NHL's top seed for the first time in their history. But in February, Stan was by far the best player in the NHL that month. A ridiculous 20 points in just 12 games, including another 3-point game against Toronto, and then another hat trick against the Wings this time, plus an assist giving him a 4-point night overall. Then hosting Detroit, had 2 assists the next game, and then right after that, yet another hat trick and an assist against Boston. That's 10 points in 3 games. Ridiculous, as the MVP talk started running rampant. At 30, 15, and 14, the Hawks had the best record in the league, and going into the final 11 games this season, it looked probable to win their very first place finish in the league. However, in March, they kind of grow cold, but Stan still played well with 10 points in 10 games, but they'd only win 2, and at least took first place in the league by a single point. Either way, Chicago finished 32, 21, and 17 with 81 points. That is their best finish in the standings since 1934-35. And their best point total in team history to date. And that means they have a date with the bottom-seeded team, the Detroit Red Wings, in the semifinals. The very team they beat to win the Cup just 2 years earlier. However, the Wings only finished 4 points back of the Hawks. And indeed, this was much of the same team that the Hawks beat 2 years earlier, but there are some notable changes. The fact that Parker McDonald had become a bit of a scoring threat. Gordie Howe won his 6th scoring title, and first in 6 years. And now they had a former Blackhawks great themselves, defenseman Bill Gadsby, who played for them from 1947 to 1955. He had joined the Wings the season prior after 6 with the Rangers. The Hawks, however, were still favored to take the series. Here we go, Game 1, Chicago Stadium. Bobby Hull's 2 first-period goals give the Hawks a 2-1 lead after 1. With the Hawks leading 3-2, Mikita helped Warham set up Nestorenko to give Chicago a 4-2 lead. The Wings fought hard for a comeback, but our hero and the Hawks take Game 1, 5-4. Game 2, however, it was no contest. The Hawks were on fire with a 3-1 lead after 2 periods on the power play, and then we got another Nestorenko, we got Pilot, we got Stan, who sends it home, a goal, a 4-1 lead. And then on another power play, Q, our hero, who finds Warham, who finds McDonald, 5-1, an eventual 5-2 win. The Hawks have a 2-0 series lead as we head to the Detroit Olympia. Game 3, hey, it looked great early as Ab gets it to Pilo, who gets it to Stan for the goal. On the power play, the Hawks draw first blood and lead 1-0 after 1. Mr. Hockey ties it, but late in the second, that amazing trio, Kenny, Ab, Mikita. It's a goal, 2-1 Hawks, but the Wings tie it to end the second period 2-2. The Hawks seem to have nothing left, however, as the Wings checking core really tightened up. They got 2 goals as Glenn Hall was left heavily unprotected. The Wings get in the series with a 4-2 win. Game 4 is completely abysmal. The Hawks only managed 18 shots on Sawchuk. Our hero actually had a third of them and was stopped every time. The Hawks lose 4-1. Hall faces another barrage of shots as the series is now tied, heading back to Chi-Town. It looks bad in Game 5. The Hawks are trailing 2-0 in the second, but manage to tie it. However, they trail 3-2 after 2. Mikita just can't solve Sawchuk, who the Hawks bombard, but he's turning back pretty much everything thrown at him and more. And the Wings end up winning 4-2. Now the Hawks are on the verge of elimination. Game 6 in Detroit, the game is tied 4-4 after 2, and our hero has been shut down by the Wings defense. Now would be time to step up, but Faulkner, Ullman, and Gadsby all get past Hall. The Wings win 7-4 and take the series in 6. Hawks' season ends in heartbreak. Mikita looked great early in the series, but the Wings got to him and shut him down eventually, be it Sawchuk and net, Gadsby at the blue line, or even two-way forward Bruce McGregor having his number. The Red Wings, however, would lose to the Leafs in 5 games in the Stanley Cup Final. Mikita had 31 goals, 45 assists for 76 points, just one shy of his career high from the year prior, but obtained a career high in goals. And wow, Ab McDonald with a clean sweep, assisting on just over half of Stan's goals, plus Stan assisting on 14 for a third straight year of Ab's goals, and all but 6, by the way, Ab McDonald scored that year, and they collaborated together on 12 assists, collaborating one way or another for 41 goals. That's just under a fifth of the goals Chicago scored that whole year. And that's all but 20 points McDonald had that year. And yes, you may not see him here, but Kenny Warren was still very present, as the two collaborated for 26 goals one way or another. Stan also had great chemistry again with Bobby Hull, and also had some, some spark with defenseman Al McNeil, who was in his first year with the Hawks. Mikita's 76 points was again good enough for third in the NHL, just 5 points behind last year's runner-up as well, Rangers star Andy Bathgate, meaning for the first time Mikita led the team in scoring as Hall saw a slight dip in production but still finished in the top 10. Speaking of which, Mikita was one of 4 Chicago players to occupy the top 10 among plus-minus leaders. Mikita was 6th best in the league. Teammate and defenseman Al McNeil was 2nd. Kenny Warren, his longtime line mate, was tied for 4th, and defenseman Wayne Hillman, who just made the full-time roster that year, was tied for 9th. Despite the epic season it was, Mikita finished 2nd in Hart Trophy voting the first time. However, he'd been a finalist and indeed the first runner-up, but Gordie Howe dominated the voting, as he did have one of the best years of his storied career in 1962-63. However, this still meant Mikita was good enough to be voted a first-team All-Star for the second straight year, as nearly half, well, no, not nearly, as half the spots indeed were occupied by Chicago players. Well, hey, it was another huge year for our hero. His second straight first-team All-Star selection, just 1 point shy of tying his career high in points, but reached the 30-goal mark for the first time in his career. He was 3rd in league scoring and led the league with 3 hat tricks. He was 6th in plus-minus, tied for 4th in game-winning goals with 6. He was also tied for power play goals with 9. And all this led to him being the first runner-up for the Hart Trophy as league MVP. I should also point out his 69 penalty minutes is actually a career low. Changes were in store for the Hawks, however, going into the 1963-64 season. Despite Mikita still being at the top of his game, the Hawks were not embarking on the dynasty that they or others felt that they should be. Rudy Pilas was out as head coach, and coming in was Billy Ray, who, during his playing days, was actually a very good utility forward for the Habs, and even got himself a couple Stanley Cup rings while there. He did have pro coaching experience, however, in 2 failed seasons with the Leafs, but then spent the last 2 seasons in the AHL coaching the Buffalo Bisons, and is coming off a Calder Cup championship. The Hawks should be seeing more success, many felt, with superstars like Mikita and Hall playing at the top of their game, and players such as Kenny Warren, Ab McDonald, and Bill Hay pretty good up front, plus hardworking grinders, backbone like Nestorenko, Chico Mackey, and Murray Balfour. And perhaps the most depthful defense in the league, you had the legendary Pierre Pilot along with Al McNeil, Wayne Hillman, the very popular Moose Vasco, and he got the great Glenn Hall and net, who was among the elite. Could this be the year with a new coach and a new vision? Can he bring championship success, a dynasty to Chicago? Out of the original 6 clubs, only Montreal, Toronto, and Detroit can say they've really had a dynasty era. As a matter of fact, the Hawks, Rangers, and Bruins at this point had 3 Stanley Cups to their franchise each, combining for 9. The Habs, Leafs, and Wings at this point combine for 30. The former 2 each have more than those 3 teams combined, and the Wings, with the least of the 3, still have 7 championships. At this point, the Hawks were touted to be the next great thing, and the Rangers you just never knew we were going to get with them in a given year, and the Bruins were just abysmal at this point. It was time for the Hawks to rise above that lower pack. Let's see if our hero can pave the way. Well, the season was off to a great start for our hero after a goal and an assist on October 10th game against the Red Wings, a monster 4-point night, a goal and 3 assists with 4 points against Toronto. Then the next game, his 4th career hat trick in a win over Boston, and the second natural hat trick of his career. That's 9 points in 3 games. He had back-to-back 2 assist games at the end of the month, as the Hawks only lost 1 game in October. In November, things were looking good again. A 3-point night on November 16th in Montreal, and then just over a week later, hosting Montreal, another huge game, 2 goals, 2 assists, 4 points. Many noticed Mikita was actually a little more vicious this year and got to a huge fight with Montreal's Dale Ballon, and he fought Bob Bond of the Leafs a couple weeks earlier. People noticed Mikita was actually a lot more vicious than usual after he had a monster showdown with Eddie Shack of the Leafs, and then on December 11th, he got his second hat trick of the year in a win over the Rangers and had an assist for a 4-point night. Then he had back-to-back 2-point nights in a home-and-home series with the Red Wings on the 14th and 15th, had 2 assist games against the Bruins and Leafs in a December that saw 17 points, 14 games with a +7, and added 23 penalty minutes. The Hawks were 28-7, and at the halfway point, and confidence was just riding high. Stan's savage ways and success on the score sheet continued. 2 big 3-point nights in January on the 5th against the Bruins, and just under 2 weeks later against the Rangers. And then back-to-back 2-goal games against the Rangers and Bruins to begin February. Then on the 16th, he got to another vicious fight, this time with Tom Johnson of the Bruins, and he also had a goal in that game. And then in the next game, he had a 3-point night with 2 goals and assists against the Rangers. And let's just say the scoring race was a very interesting one going into the final month of the season. Neck and neck were the 2 stars on the same team, Hull and Mikita. With our hero just leading by 2 points, Hull was looking for his 3rd scoring championship in 5 seasons, and Mikita was looking for his very first. But also Jean Beliveau of the Habs, who won the scoring title back in 1955-56, was certainly allowed to obtain it again, as he's in the hunt with 71 points. Well, to kick off March, Stan had a huge day. 1 goal and 3 assists for 4 points in a win over Montreal. Hull was pointless, and so was Beliveau, meaning Stan moved ahead to 80 points, reaching a career high, 6 ahead of Hull, 9 above Beliveau. But then Hull had a 3-point night the next game, but Mikita also had a goal. So that puts Mikita at 81 and Hull at 77. But in the next 3 games, Mikita had 6 points compared to Hull's 4, meaning our hero led with 87, and while Hull had 81. But however, Hull would have 6 points in the last 3 games of the season. As for Stan, well, yes, indeed, with 89 points, 2 more than the Golden Jet, his teammate Bobby Hull, Stan Mikita indeed wins his first scoring title, meaning he is the recipient of the Art Ross Trophy and did it all with grit and heart. And the Hawks finished the season 36-22-12, 84 points, just missing out on first place by 1 point behind the Habs, once again having to settle for second. And in their way come playoff time, the team that upset them last year, the Detroit Red Wings, who had 71 points and were even heavier underdogs this year. The Hawks desperately want to shake off last year's disappointment, so let's see if our hero can help. Game 1 at Chicago Stadium, Mikita takes command. The Wings took a 1-0 lead, however, in the first period, but 50 seconds later, Stan to Pilote, and then McDonald scores the goal. The game is tied 1-1 after 1. In the second period, however, Sawchuk and Hall stop everything, and it remains the same after 2. But in the third, this time, again, it's Stan starting the rush. But this time, it's McDonald getting it back to Pilote, who launches it home. It's a 2-1 Blackhawks lead. Under 2 minutes later, the Hawks take a 3-1 lead, and with 3:37 to go, Pilote takes command of the power play and gets to Bobby to Stan. It's a goal. The Hawks win the game 4-2-1. Game 2, however, looks bad. The Wings are up 3-0 until late in the second. Hay gets 2 goals, 7 seconds apart to wake up Chicago Stadium, but Howe then makes it 4-2 with 3 seconds left in the frame. The Hawks nearly pull off a comeback but lose 5-4. The series is tied. Mikita plays a pretty bad game at -3. Game 3, we're off to Detroit, and it's even worse. Sawchuk stops all 26 shots he faces, including 6 off the stick of Mikita, and the Red Wings win 3-0 and take a 2-1 series lead. Come on now, Game 4, it's crunch time, but the Wings strike first. However, 49 seconds later, that trio again. A Stan, a Kenny, a Ab. The Hawks tie it 1-1 after 1. The Wings get 1 in the second, the Hawks get 1 in the third, and we're off to overtime, and 8:21 in. It's the Jet to Stan to bow for the Hawks win. A huge game from our hero, making up for his last 2 outings. The series is tied 2-2. We're going back to Chicago. Game 5, Mikita and Pilo set up Bobby on the power play, and the Wings get 1 in the second. It's 1-1 after 2. The game is tied, however, late in the third period, and the time is winding down with 3:52 left. Hillman sends in Stan! A beautiful goal. The roof of Chicago Stadium explodes. The Hawks win 3-2, and have a 3-2 series lead. They're just 1 win away from going back to the Cup and in Detroit for Game 6. Stan gets a goal and an assist on both Blackhawk goals. But the Wings score 7, and they win 7-2. What is happening here? Game 7 in Chicago, and the Hawks put in a half-hearted effort. They lose 4-2. The Wings, for the second straight year, upset the Hawks, and they head back to the Stanley Cup Final. Stan had 9 points in 7 games, leading the team in scoring. He made up for his poor performances in Games 2 and 3, with clutch performances setting up the OT winner in Game 4, and Game 5 scoring the game winner late in the third, a memorable goal in Blackhawk history. However, it was not to be, and the Wings, however, would lose again to the Leafs, this time in 7 games, who win their third straight cup. As, of course, has been mentioned, Mikita's league-leading 89 points, 39 goals, and 50 assists won him the Art Ross Trophy. Who helped him get there, you ask? Well, surprise, surprise, the names we are very familiar with. First off, the insane fact that more than half of Stan's assists were to Kenny Warham, who had a career year with 39 goals, meaning Stan assisted on all but 13. And more than half of Kenny's assists were to Stan, and together they collaborated for 48 total goals. And of course, Ab McDonald is there, leading with 12 assist collaborations, as he and Mikita worked very well together to produce 29 goals. Also, Bobby Hull, who, as you see in this video, Stan didn't shift as often as you might think you did with him, but either way, they still produced 29 goals themselves. Well, we already mentioned how Mikita won the scoring title, and he again finishes 6th in plus-minus, this time with plus 21, and tied with teammate and linemate Ab McDonald, and his other linemate, Kenny Warham, was tied for second, only behind Hawks defenseman Pierre Pilote. Throw in Al McNeil and Moose Vasco. That's 6 spots occupied by Blackhawk players in the top 10 in this category. And what was a pretty big shock, Stan finished 5th and had less votes than last year for Hart Trophy as league MVP. Some saw this as a major snub, as he statistically did have a better season than Jean Beliveau in almost every category, but some of his overly aggressive style may have cost him some votes, as he did have a career high in penalty minutes. Hey, but for the third straight year, he's a first-team All-Star, which again makes the Hart Trophy voting make even less sense. But be that as it may, it's still his third straight, and all but one spot belonged to a Chicago Blackhawks player, as Leafs defenseman Tim Horton, the only non-Blackhawk here. Perhaps a little more disappointing they didn't win the Cup or even appear in it. Well, in addition to winning the league scoring title for the first time, he also led the league in power play goals with 14, and tied with Kenny Warham, and tied the third in game-winning goals with 7, as mentioned, and tied for 6th in plus-minus. He also tied the league lead teammate Bobby Hull for hat tricks, and for the third straight year, a first-team All-Star, but puzzlingly finishes 5th for Hart Trophy voting. However, his third best 146 penalty minutes may have something to do with it. Stan Mikita's style of play was seen as polarizing to many, but this wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Some feel this aggression, along with his skill prowess up front, was an attribute, but others even said it was a detriment. However, many feel Chicago's playoff failures the last couple seasons is a much deeper issue. But regardless of how award voters feel, the numbers don't lie, but neither does what he does on the ice. Stan Mikita is truly the most talented and dynamic forwards in the league, who can play all ends of the ice, has special skills with the puck, can set up goals greatly, and score them is even greater. But the Hawks made a shocking move before the season started. They sent Ab McDonald along with role player Reggie Fleming to the Boston Bruins for 11-year veteran defenseman Doug Mons, who will add up more to an already strong blue line core. Yet now questions surround what Mikita would do without one of his top line mates beside him, a man who was key in his progression in his young career. And they added a new young forward to their lineup, a fella by the name of Phil Esposito. Also, after missing out on the preseason classic, Stan Mikita plays in his second NHL All-Star game. At this point, it's still the format of the defending champion versus the league All-Stars, and Mikita, along with Hull, Hilo, and Moose all made the preseason classic, where the All-Stars slipped by the Maple Leafs 3-2. Mikita was also named alternate captain going into this season, this now being his 6th pro season, as he starts off right. 15 points in 7 games in October. That's just above 2 points a game, including 2 4-point outings. But in November, he went through one of the biggest slumps of his career, actually. 11 games in November, he had just 5 points. It was a -3. And the Hawks themselves were not looking good at all. As December got underway, they were sitting at 8-11-2 on December the 6th. But then a huge 13-game unbeaten streak. Stan was back to his vicious and skilled self. In that stretch, he had 5 goals and 12 assists for 17 points. Was a monster plus 13, making plays, eluding top defensemen. The goalies were just left dazed by what he was doing. He again was proving just how excellent he really is at what he does. And Stan kept on doing his thing, spending time in the sin bin and putting pucks in or helping others put it in. A 4-point night against Detroit on January 8th, back-to-back 3-point nights against Boston and the Rangers on the 20th and the 24th. But on February, he was just on a whole other level. 10 goals, 10 assists, 20 points, 13 games, and a plus 12. He was on track for yet another scoring title, and oh, you better believe those MVP talks to be starting, as the Hawks were on track for their 7th straight playoff appearance. Mikita was at the same point he was last season, going into the final month, 76 points. He has a commanding lead over teammate Bobby Hull by 9 points. And actually, Hull hit a scoring slump in the final slew of games, and yes, indeed, Stan Mikita wins his 2nd straight scoring title and also leads the league with a career-high 59 assists. The Hawks finished the season 34-28, good enough for 76 points and 3rd place in the league. And in the opening round, they faced yes, the Detroit Red Wings, who were not underdogs this time, were actually the best team in the NHL with 87 points this season. As you may have saw on the scoring title graphic, Ullman, Howe, and Delvecchio all made the top 5 in scoring. Also, to add to the team, the unlikely comeback of a man who was key in Mikita's emergence in his rookie year, Ted Lindsay, who of course was a huge part of Detroit's glory years in the 1950s. Gone, however, was Terry Sawchuk, and now in net was Rookie of the Year Calder Trophy winner Roger Crozier. Expectations were not high on Chicago's end. Game 1 of the Detroit Olympia. It's 2-2 after 2, and Chico Mackey scores a minute into the third to give the Hawks a 3-2 lead. But with 7:47 to play, Delvecchio ties it, and then 3 minutes later, Ullman scores what would be the game winner. The Hawks lose 4-3. Our hero does not look very good in the loss. Game 2, it was looking worse. Detroit led 4-1 early in the third off a goal from Howe, but 26 seconds later, Pierre to Stan, and Bobby finishes it off. The Hawks have life. Less than 3 minutes later, it's Mikita to the Jet. The Hawks only trail by a goal, but that's as good as it was get. And yeah, the Wings win 6-3 despite a good game from Mikita. It's looking bad heading to Chicago, down 2-0. Game 3 at Chicago Stadium after taking a 1-0 lead after a Bill Hay goal. 129 later, Havlik to Stan, who makes it happen. 2-0 Hawks. Just over 2 minutes later, Stan and Kenny set up Mons. The Hawks take a 3-0 lead, and it will be a 5-2 win, and they're in this thing. Game 4 is a highly competitive outing with great goaltending and defensive play, and the game was tied 1-1 until midway through the third on a goal from Hull, and the Hawks hang on. The series is tied, heading back to Detroit. Game 5, it looks good again for the Hawks as they take a 2-1 lead after Hull scores late in the second, but then a hat trick from Norm Ullman followed right after, and the Wings won 4-2. Here we go again. Up against the wall, facing elimination in Game 6 at Chicago Stadium. In the first period is scoreless as Crozier and Hall are turning back everything. The only goal of the second comes off Warham's stick. The Hawks lead 1-0 after 2. Fans are on the edge of the seat until with 7:42 remaining. The man who would be known as Espo, Phil Esposito, scores a goal, and then just under 3 minutes later, it's Pilo. It's a Kenny. It's a Stan Mikita. 3-0 Hawks. 1:33 later, Hay adds a shorthanded goal. The Hawks win 4-0 and force a Game 7. But the Hawks have trouble winning the Detroit Olympia in the playoffs, and this has been a homer series. So here we go, Game 7 in the Olympia in Detroit. And oh boy, 2-0 Detroit after 1. This is bad. However, in the second, Hull power play marker puts them on the board, but then we got Al McNeil to Stan, who sets up Mons. It's 2-2 after 2. Oh, wow. And then just 9:42 into the third period, it happened. So here Mons, okay Chico, he got it to Mikita. He scores. The Olympia is silenced. The Hawks lead 3-2, and with just under 6 minutes to play, Hull sets up Nestorenko, and it's a goal. The clock winds down. A 3, a 2, a 1. 0. The Chicago Blackhawks take the series in 7 games, shocking the Wings after back-to-back upset exits at the hands of them, and they are going back to the Stanley Cup final for our hero. This will be his third trip to the big dance, and oh boy did he earn it. A huge clutch performance in Game 7. Despite some rough outings in the series, he came through when it mattered most, and it has paid off huge. And yes, the Chicago Blackhawks are back in the finals, and standing in their way, however, is a team who, like them, has suffered some massive playoff disappointments. The Montreal Canadiens making their first finals appearance since their last win in 1960. From that 1950s dynasty, superstars like Jean Beliveau were aging like a fine wine at 33 years old, playing the best hockey of his career, as is the pocket rocket Henri Richard. And also we got the likes of Claude Provost, Ralph Backstrom, and new younger stars like Bobby Rousseau, John Ferguson, and a small young mighty winger by the name of Yvan Cournoyer. On defense, mostly different from the 1950s squads, but still top-notch, like Jacques Laperriere, Jean-Guy Talbot, and J.C. Tremblay, who was there towards the end of that dynasty. And in net, the formative duo of Charlie Hodge and 13-year veteran, the Gumper, Gump Worsley, looking for his first Stanley Cup ring. The team was still coached by the great Toe Blake, and had the second best record in the NHL with 83 points. The Hawks, however, beat the Habs in their last couple playoff meetings. Can our hero help bring it back home again, however? So here we go. Game 1, the Montreal Forum. After a scoreless first period, the Habs take a 2-1 lead after 2 periods, but in the third, Stan takes command of the power play as he and Mackey set up Ravlich to tie the game 2-2. However, Cournoyer's power play marker of his own midway to the third is enough for the game winner, and the Habs take Game 1. Game 2, our hero has 4 chances to beat the Gumper, but he fails to do so. As a matter of fact, none of the Hawks do so, as Montreal's defense is flawless, and Worsley makes some big saves in a 2-0 win, and a 2-0 series lead. We're going to Chicago. But hey, if the Detroit series taught us anything, we can't count out the Chicago team. So Game 3, Chicago Stadium, after a scoreless first period, the Hawks put more pressure on Gumper, but the Habs do on Hall as well, and take a 1-0 lead, but 47 seconds later, Esposito ties it. It's 1-1 after 2. And then early in the third period, it's Stan to Kenny. It's a goal. The Hawks lead 2-1 and take Game 3, 3-1. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Game 4 is tied 1-1 after 2 periods, but then early in the third, the Hawks take a 2-1 lead. And then late in the third, just 4:37 apart, Hay, Hall, Jarrett, they all score. A monster 5-1 win, tying the series at 2, sending a message to the Habs. Oh boy, but the Habs actually got that message in Game 5, loud and clear, with a 6-0 win. The Hawks are again on the verge of elimination. Our hero, who has been very effective on the score sheet, needs to step up. And in Game 6 in Chicago, he does just that. First, by going toe-to-toe in a fight with Terry Harper of the Habs, sending Chicago Stadium into frenzy, and a big highlight of the first period, which was actually scoreless. The Habs score the only goal of the second, and the tension in Chicago Stadium is immense. But then Vasco scores the third to tie it, and then 2:09 later on the power play, we got Pierre, we got Stan, we got Mons, who finishes off 2-1 Hawks. Hall keeps them in. We're going to Game 7 once again. It all comes down to this. The Montreal Forum. The Hawks are fearless going into this game. They could win it all. The Hawks dynasty can be it. It can be. Beliveau scores 14 seconds in. The Habs are controlled literally from the word go and win the game 4-0, taking the Stanley Cup in 7. Once again, the Hawks season ends in heartbreak. Oh, so close, but oh so far. Our hero went goalless and didn't play overly bad, as be that as it may, as 3 of the 4 Habs wins were shutouts, and they did shut down Mikita as well as Hull and others in those wins, with great goaltending, superb defense, and Henri Richard, whose defensive prowess was always ever present in the playoffs, breathing down Mikita's neck. The Hawks, however, still went to the 7th game of the Stanley Cup Finals and looked to restore faith and hope in Chicago fans of reaching the top of the mountain once again. As mentioned, Stan Mikita won the scoring title again with 28 goals and 59 assists for 87 points. Despite the loss of Ab McDonald, he and Kenny Warren once again clicked in a huge way, collaborating for 32 goals, and Mikita assists on all but 2 of the goals Warren scored that year. Superstar defenseman Pierre Pilot, who had the best offensive season of his career, assisted on nearly half of Mikita's goals and collaborated a total with 26. He still clicked well with Hull when they were shifted together, but he also had great chemistry with defenseman Doug Mons, who acquired in the Ab McDonald trade. Mikita finished 4th in plus-minus, as again the Hawks dominate the category with 5 players once again. Mikita, along with Pilot, McNeil, and Hull, and rookie defenseman Doug Jarrett are all present in the top 10. You'd think with a year like this, Mikita would get significant votes for the Hart Trophy, but he got none. Yes, the NHL's leading scorer, a man consistently in the top 10 in numerous categories, such as this, got no f***ing votes for the Hart Trophy. Mikita is only the 8th player in NHL history at this point since 1924, when the trophy was first awarded, to not garner any votes, and that first since Bernie Geoffrion back in 1955. Also, his streak of first-team All-Stars stalls at 3. He was named to the second-team All-Stars and lost out to Norm Ullman of the Red Wings for the first spot at center. But hey, it was another great year for our hero as he led the Hawks back to the Stanley Cup Finals in a losing cause, but won his second straight scoring title despite being snubbed in Hart Trophy voting and his streak of first-team All-Star selections coming to an end. He's still second-team All-Star, and he notched a career high in assists and also notched a career high in penalty minutes as well. He is 4th in plus-minus, 9th in power play goals, 4th in game-winning goals. At 25 years old, now 6 NHL seasons under his belt, again, he's among the best, but yet there are still a few out there, mainly award voters, who just don't feel that way. As famous and as great as Mikita was at this time, it seemed in some ways he wasn't getting the recognition he truly deserved in some ways. Did it really have to do with his time in the sin bin? I mean, Gordie Howe, the greatest of all time at this point, spent his fair share of the time in the box, but the difference is that many called out that even though Mikita was seen as fearless at times, many saw him as dirty as well, whereas Howe was simply seen as aggressive and tough, which is indeed true. Mikita's style of play was always up for debate, according to some I've even talked to who lived through this era. But one thing was for sure, he certainly deserved more respect than what he was getting. Going into 1965-66, hopes for the Hawks were actually quite high after being oh so close, just one game away from winning the Stanley Cup. And hey, Stan was looking fantastic. 2 3-point games in October, 3 assists against Boston, and a goal and 2 assists against Montreal, both wins as they finished October 4-0-0. And in November, had 7 goals and 7 assists for 14 points, and he played some huge games. A goal and 2 assists for 3 points against Toronto. The following game, 2 goals against the Red Wings. On November 17th in New York, had 2 goals and 2 assists for 4 points, and 2 goals against Detroit. All of these games wins. Mikita continued to roll on back-to-back hat tricks in wins over the Bruins and Rangers, and another 3-point night over the Bruins. And in the month of January, Mikita had 13 points in 12 games. He was a -2, but only racked up 4 penalty minutes. It seemed as though he was going in longer stretches without getting in much trouble these days. Hey, in February, our hero was doing his thing and doing it quite differently, however. 15 points in 12 games, a +5, and highlights including a 3-point night against the Rangers. Then 2 games later, another 3-point night with 2 goals and an assist against the Leafs, and a pair of 2-assist games over the Bruins. The Hawks sat at 31, 18, and 7, tied for first place with the Habs, with 69 points heading into March. But the most interesting stat, just 2 penalty minutes. People were noticing Stan's focus change quite significantly. Stan, however, went through a small dry spell in March, but still managed 12 points in 14 games, but he didn't win the scoring title this year. Simply because teammate Bobby Hull had one of the greatest single seasons in NHL history, setting an NHL record at the time with 54 goals and also another record, 97 points. Mikita still finished tied for second in the league with 78 points. And hey, he was a big help in Hull's huge year, and with a 37, 25, and 8 finish for 82 points, again, second best in the league. And for the 4th straight year in the playoffs, they contend with the Detroit Red Wings, who this year saw a major dip in the standings with 74 points. And the Hawks finally shook the Wings off their back last season. Let's see if they're poised to continue their success. Game 1 from Chicago Stadium at 6:08 into the game. Doug Jarrett gets it to Stan, who sets up Kenny. Then the Hawks draw first blood. Hull makes it 2-0, and the Wings do get one back late in the first to make it 2-1. But that's all the goals in the game, as Hull is amazing in net and leads the rest of the way, and the Chicago takes Game 1. Game 2, however, is an utter disaster. Ullman, Delacchio, and Howe just obliterate our hero and the Hawks. 7-0 as the series is tied, heading to Detroit. And Game 3 at the Olympia, the Wings are up 1-0 after 1. Then the second on the power play, Bobby to Stan to Chico. It's a goal. We're all tied up. Nestorenko scores later on, and it's 2-1 after 2. And Hull, playing more like he did in Game 1, holds the Hawks in there. And Chicago now has a 2-1 series lead. In Game 4, the Wings strike first, but on the power play, Mikita scores a power play marker. It's tied 1-1 after 1. But the Wings go back on the attack. The Hawks lose 5-1, and the series is tied 2-2. We go back to Chicago. It looks bad. Andy Bathgate gives the Wings a 3-0 lead early in the second, but the Hawks cut to 3-2 after 2 periods. But the Wings take control, 5-3 to get the win, and once again, the familiar story is writing a new chapter after a bit of a stall for the Red Wings the year prior. Stan's game was pretty rough. Game 6, however, the Hawks were fighting to force a Game 7 like last year, and Hall was playing great as the Hawks led 2-1 with the clock winding down, but with 3:35 to play, Dean Prentice tied it for the Wings, and just over a minute later, he scores again. The Wings go 3-2, and just like that, Chicago's season is over for the third time in 4 outings in the last 4 seasons against the Wings. It was probably the worst our heroes ever played in a playoff series. A -5 and only 3 points in 6 games, and the Wings had his number this entire series. The Red Wings went on to their third Cup appearance in 4 seasons, but would also lose their third Cup appearance in 4 seasons, this one against the Habs in 6 games. Mikita's 30 goals and 48 assists for 78 points gave our star another big year, and his biggest collaborator was Doug Mons, who for many years was a star defenseman with the Bruins, was very much fitting in well with the Blackhawks in the 2 seasons he has been there, and assisted on more than a third of Mikita's goals. Together they collaborated for 30 overall. His chemistry with defensemen was evident once again this year as he and Pilo collaborated for 7 assists, and also a young defenseman by the name of Pat Stapleton was also clicking well with Stan. And hey, to top it off, Mikita assisted on 13 of Hull's record 54 goals, and together they collaborated for 23 on the year. Also, the chemistry with Warren was still ever present as they collaborated for 22. And once again, our hero was completely snubbed in Hart Trophy voting with, again, 0 votes, yet was named back to the first-team All-Stars for the 4th time in his career. Again, all but 2 spots on this team occupied by Blackhawk players. For the first time since 1962, Mikita didn't finish in the top 10 among plus-minus getters, but was still a +6. And for the first time since 1961, didn't finish among top game-winning goals leaders, but still only one of the top power play scorers in the league. His career low 58 minutes is actually worth looking at. Is Stan trying to stay more disciplined? Well, despite again being snubbed for any votes for MVP, he was a first-team All-Star for the 4th time in his career. His whole career, Stan Mikita was the kid who had to fight his way to prominence both figuratively and literally, but it seems that kid, now 26 years old and entering his 8th NHL season, 1966-67, was finally about to grow up. It was around this time that Stan's daughter, as the story goes, observed something while he was on a road trip. When he returned from that road trip, Mikita's wife Jill had told him that their daughter Meg was watching her father play a game on TV, and asked Mommy exactly why Daddy spent so much time sitting down. Also factor in that sometimes players mature and change their game to adapt to their team's strategy or the era they're playing in, and hopefully to change their team's fortunes for the better. It was getting frustrating, a team as good as the Hawks were failing to reach the top of the mountain again. Mikita and Hull were among 2 of the best in the game, period, and Hull was breaking records. Mikita, if he wasn't winning the scoring title, was a runner-up and always in the top 10. Kenny Warham was still playing great hockey, and you had a young, talented up-and-comer named Phil Esposito on top of that. Also, a youngster by the name of Ken Hodge was another forward coming up, as well as Bobby's younger brother, Dennis Hull, was pretty much developing a decent game. The character players were still there, Chico Mackey, Eric Nestorenko, and Bill Hay. On defense, it was still top-notch core. Perhaps only second to Montreal's group. You had Pierre Pilot. He had won 3 Norris trophies as the league's top defenseman. And while they lost Al McNeil to the Rangers, youngsters Keith Jarrett and Pat Stapleton were becoming stars in their own right. But Moose Vasco had retired. But now you had Doug Mons, who was playing some outstanding hockey. And in net, the great Glenn Hall, 35 and still at the top of his game. And a very reliable backup in Dennis Desjardins. Billy Ray was the right guy for the coaching job. Tommy Ivan was among the best GMs in the league. So what was it gonna take? Well, is it gonna be our hero's maturing prowess will be the key to this team reaching the top again? Little did we know what 1966-67 held for Stan Mikita. And Mikita wasted no time on opening day, lighting up Eddie Giacomin and decimating Harry Howell on the Rangers' defense on opening night. The very next game, a goal and 2 assists for 3 points against the Red Wings, and 2 assists against them the next night. This fast start in October resulted in 4 wins that ended with a 2-assist game in Montreal. 11 points in 4 games and a +6 in the month of October. And Mikita and the Hawks rolled into November, and despite a slow start, he had 3 assists in a November 13th win over Toronto, and did the same 2 games later against Toronto. And then in 3 straight games, a home-and-home with Toronto and a game against defending champions Montreal, he totaled 6 points. And then on November 27th, notched the 8th hat trick of his career on Eddie Johnson, the same goaltender he notched his first hat trick back in January 1963 on. With 8 goals, 9 assists, 17 points in 13 games and a +7, Mikita was on the biggest roll of his career, it seemed. Also, get this, just 2 penalty minutes. That's simply just a holding call in a game against the Leafs. So far, there's only penalty minutes all year. Mikita's disciplined play was turning heads and even shocking many. He was still as fearless as ever and worked hard for a face-off win and was still as gritty as ever fighting for a puck, but he seemed a lot smarter about it. He didn't seem to have to jab his stick in anyone's guts or drop the gloves or anything like that. And it just seemed like he was just a whole different player. He's finding the right man to pass it to like a work of art and scoring goals magnificently, making some of the news' highlight reels. And again, he plays a big game with 3 assists in a win over Detroit. And his success against the Bruins continues in a 10-2 thrashing on December 8th. And whenever Mikita touched the puck, it just seemed like magic was about to happen. A career high 5 points in one game, a goal, 4 assists, and a +5, also a single game best for his career. And then he follows that up, 2 goals in a game against the Rangers and a couple of assists in a win over Toronto. 5 goals, 14 assists, 19 points, no penalty minutes, and a +9 in 12 games. The Hawks are 17, 8, and 4, and were 2 points ahead of the Rangers for first place. This new Mikita is a lot like the old Mikita in terms of production, but the dynamic of his play was outstanding and growing further. And it rung in the new year in a huge way, 2 assists against Boston, and as a teenager by the name of Bobby Orr had trouble with our hero all game long. A goal and an assist against the Red Wings a couple games later. Yep, check that off. And then on January 18, 1967, the All-Star Game, now moved to the midseason, saw Mikita make his 3rd appearance in the exhibition, as the All-Stars, however, dropped a 3-0 loss to the Montreal Canadiens, and he ended the month with back-to-back big games against the Leafs, 2 assists, as well as 2 goals and 1 assist for 3 points. What can he not do at this point? In February, Stan Mikita was making headlines all over the place, and MVP talks. Yes, the trophy he had no votes for in the last couple of seasons, he was said to be a lock for. I don't know. Again, more dominance over Boston with 3 points, and then in mid-February, had another stretch of 3 straight 2-point games totaling 6 points, in a tie over Toronto and then 2 wins over Detroit. The Blackhawks were tearing up the league. Nobody was safe in the path of our hero, as well as Bobby Hull, who himself is having another phenomenal season. The Hawks have 73 points. The closest to them is the Rangers with 62. And we're going into the final month of the season. And now, speaking of the final month of the season, Mikita had a commanding lead in the scoring race, 19 points more than teammate Bobby Hull. With 16 games remaining, some felt he might even reach that unattainable 100-point marker, at the very least, break Hull's record. And with 3 assists on March 5th, he was well on his way, because 2 games later against Montreal, he had a goal and 2 assists, frustrating Jacques Laperriere and the top-notch defense. He ended the season, however, on April 2nd with 2 assists in the season finale against the Rangers and had no penalty minutes the entire month. The Blackhawks finished a franchise record 41, 17, and 12 for 94 points. Best record in the league, which means they win the... No, the President's Trophy didn't exist yet. However, before it was awarded as a conference championship, the Prince of Wales Trophy was awarded to the best team in the league with the best record, and the Hawks win it. This is the first time they've had the league's best record in their history. 41 years. The closest to them was the Montreal Canadiens with 77 points. And as for Stan, his 3rd scoring title in 4 years, tying an NHL record for 97 points in the season. The record held, of course, by teammate Bobby Hull. A career high in assists and leading the league in that category with 62. And again, 17 points ahead of Hull, the closest to him, and 27 points ahead of Norm Ullman, who was in 3rd. There's just no stopping this one-of-a-kind team. There's no stopping our hero. They, however, do not have to contend with the Red Wings this year, as for the first time since the finals in 1962, they will face the Toronto Maple Leafs. The Leafs finished with 75 points and were deemed as the over-the-hill gang. And I'm sure star players like Dave Keon at 27 and Frank Mahovlich at 29 were still in their best years. The Leafs were seen as an old bunch. Captain George Armstrong was well into his 30s. It was mainly their defense of Marcel Pronovost, Red Kelly, Tim Horton, and Alan Stanley, and also with goaltenders Johnny Bauer in his 40s, and Terry Sawchuk at 37, was why the Leafs were seen as an aging bunch. But this wasn't to say they didn't have younger talent. They had forwards like Pete Stemkowski, Jim Pappen, and Ron Ellis, and even Bob Bolford was only in his early 30s, as were defensemen Bob Bond and Larry Hillman, but this team was seen as a slow bunch that just would never keep up with the Hawks. No chance. Not at all. So here we go. Game 1, Chicago Stadium. Early in the game, just over 5 minutes in, Stan again takes charge of the power play. He finds Stapleton, who in turn finds Kenny. The Hawks lead 1-0. They take a 2-1 lead after one, and then lead 3-1 in the second. Then Mons, then Kenny to Mikita. It's a goal. The Hawks lead 4-1. A goal and assist for our hero. They take game 1 5-2. However, game 2 is not going well. The Hawks are down 3-0 after 2 periods, and Sawchuk, showing why he's arguably the greatest playoff goaltender ever, is just shutting down everything. However, Stan gets the Hawks in it with a goal in the third, but it's not enough. The Leafs stun the Hawks 3-1, and the series is tied, shifting to Toronto. Game 3 at Maple Leaf Gardens, and the hell is happening here? Again, it's 3-0 Toronto after 2. Again, Sawchuk just can't be solved and stops our hero on the 4 shots he had against him. Oh, the Hawks do get one back, but it's another 3-1 loss. The Leafs lead the series 2-1. How are these old fogies? Oh, wait, never mind. Game 4 is back to reality. 9 seconds in, Mons begins to rush. Then it's Stan to Kenny. 1-0. It goes back and forth. It's tied at 2 after 2, but the Hawks go up 4-2 and hang on to win. 4-3, the series is tied as we go to Chicago Stadium for Game 5. And yes, Toronto, you had your fun. And the Hawks lose 4-2 and are on the verge of elimination as our hero, despite 10 shots, can't get a goal. In Game 6, back in Toronto, our hero was -3 on ice for all 3 Leaf goals. In a 3-1 loss, Chicago's dream season just instantly became a nightmare. Our hero was shut down for the most part, despite a good performance in Game 1. What a sad end to a joyous season for Stan Mikita and the Blackhawks. The Leafs would actually go on to defeat the Habs to win the Stanley Cup. Well, Mikita's career year of 35 goals and 62 assists, tying an NHL record of 97 points, was courtesy a lot of Doug Mons, who has really impacted Mikita's game very positively since coming to Chicago, leading and assisting on Mikita's goals and collaborations, and overall, he was in on 45 of Mikita's 97 points, nearly pushing the halfway point. Remarkable. And hey, surprise, surprise, Mikita found Warham more than any other, assisting on 24 of Warham's 31 goals that year. And look at this. Here's something you'll never see again. In terms of plus minus, the first, like I said, first and only time in NHL history, the entire top 10 in the category belonged to one team. It was the Chicago Blackhawks, with our hero in at number 3 with a plus 40. A career high, of course. Again, one marvels at how this team didn't even appear in the final, let alone win it. And look at this. A trophy that Mikita never once got a vote for. The Lady Byng Trophy for sportsmanship, gentlemanly play, and a high standard of playing ability. 2 years prior, with over 100 penalty minutes, nobody would have dreamed this would happen. And yeah, hey, his career low 12 penalty minutes wasn't just a stat. His whole demeanor had changed, and he dominated the voting. So yes, indeed. Let's see, our Ross Trophy for the league scoring title, the Lady Byng Trophy, and then... After getting snubbed from even getting votes the prior 2 seasons, Stan Mikita at long last wins the Hart Trophy, beating out Rangers goaltender Eddie Giacomin and teammate Bobby Hull, which means Mikita becomes the first ever Triple Crown winner in NHL history with the Art Ross, the Byng, and the Hart. A history-making year for our hero. And hey, of course, this meant Mikita was a first-team All-Star for the 5th time in his career, 4 out of 6 spots, including all 4 positions occupied by the Blackhawks. It was one of the most celebrated and greatest single seasons in NHL history, a Triple Crown winner, the first, and to tie an NHL record for single season on points with 97. In addition to all those accomplishments, a first-team All-Star yet again, played in his third NHL All-Star game, and again in these major categories, third in the NHL for plus 40. He tied for third in power play goals and tied for fourth in game-winning goals. Truly, the epitome of an epic season in professional hockey, and now after 8 of them, and just at 27 years old, one would have to wonder what else he had to offer in the future. But he'd soon be entering a new era. The original 6 was no more. The next 6 entered the league as the NHL was ready to undergo its first major expansion. And how are things going to change? When a major expansion happens, the structure of the league changes. Everything changes. Even the style of the game often changes. And how will our hero fare? And a new era, again, like I said, can change players and teams. Will the Hawks ever return to the top of the mountain? Can he top or even match this epic season? Also, Chicago is ready to undergo some major changes as well going into next year. But right now, that is where we leave you. You'll find out more in part 2, as this does it for part 1 of our look at the great Stan Mikita. Stay tuned for part 2 in the meantime. Like the video, share, and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, I'll see ya!